Our next presenter is Dr. Philip Silkoff. So Dr. Silkoff has been there, done that. He has gone through the whole thing, and so he can explain through his experience, how he did it and how you too can do it.
Well, thanks. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. And I hope you can see me. The light's not so good, but well, welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to have some time just to have an informal discussion about my experience. By the way, I'm not a founder of the company I got these grants for, but I was the number 2 employee about 6 years ago. And I'm now the oldest employee in Third Pole. And I'll tell you briefly about that company. For those of you who would like to contact me after, I've provided my email here if you want to take a second to write it down, because you don't know yet if you need it, so we'll give it again at the end. So, just seeing if this will advance. Yeah. So, I trained, my medical degree was in the UK, in prehistory, let's call it. I then lived in Israel for many years. Well, Israel's a great hub of innovation, as you know, but I didn't do any innovation when I was in Israel. But then I moved to Canada, and in Canada, I was a fellow at the University of Toronto, and I started my research in the field of nitric oxide medicine, and really I've been involved ever since in nitric oxide in one aspect or another. I was in academia as well, as a lot of people are before they take the plunge and go to the dark side. So I was at University of Colorado, National Jewish Hospital, and I, let me just take this off. I was tempted to go into industry. I was there for 7 years, and then I moved to AstraZeneca. At AstraZeneca, I was involved in a phase 3 program, 2 large global trials in chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and eventually that led to a supplementary NDA submission, which was successful. But then I decided that I wanted to experience some early clinical development, so I moved to Janssen, which, as you know, is pharmaceutical branch of J&J. I was there for 7 years, and I was involved in multiple early projects, so preclinical, discovery, phase 1 and phase 2. After 7 years at Janssen, I then decided that, well, they decided that they weren't going to pursue pulmonary medicine anymore, so I decided I'll move somewhere else. So I then moved to Third Pole, which is a small biotech company up in Boston, which is focusing on inhaled nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a selective pulmonary vasodilator. So it's approved for the treatment of neonatal pulmonary hypertension and hypoxic respiratory failure. Currently, it's used from big tanks, which are manufactured in a chemical plant, shipped to the hospital, have to be stored and administered to the to babies with pulmonary hypertension. But it's also used off-label in many different indications within the hospital space. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. Right now, I'm the acting chief medical officer for Third Pole, but I stepped down as an employee so that I could diversify. I'm consulting for, for clinical development in several areas of medical device and pharmaceutical development, and that's how I spend my time. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Once I gave a talk and nobody could hear or see me for the whole talk. So.
All good.
Okay, so Third Pole is a cool company. It creates a drug, nitric oxide, from ambient air. So the principle is the same as what's found in nature. When you have a lightning storm, the electrical discharge causes production of a plasma, which is a zone of ionized air molecules, so nitrogen, diatomic nitrogen, diatomic oxygen dissociate into their monatomic forms, and then they recombine. And when they recombine, they form nitric oxide, which to some is air pollution, but in my company, it's a drug. So it shows you the yin and yang of these things. So we produce nitric oxide electrically from ambient air, and that nitric oxide is, we can generate as much as we want as long as you have electricity. And we can create therapeutic levels for inhalation. And when you inhale it, it goes down into the lung, and then it diffuses across from the very terminal airways into the very terminal pulmonary vasculature and causes pulmonary vasodilation, which is very useful if you're treating pulmonary hypertension, which like systemic hypertension, it's high blood pressure in the lungs, and it needs to be treated in patients who have chronic pulmonary hypertension. So this technology is really differentiating from the competition, or I should say the established methods of administering nitric oxide, which rely on, as I said, large tanks, which have to be shipped to the hospital. There's a supply chain. Here we just really plug and play. You turn the device on and you produce the drug. It does produce some nitrogen dioxide, which is toxic, and so we remove this with a chemical scavenger, and that way we produce what would be considered medical grade nitric oxide for inhalation by patients. So the vision is to take this technology, and we are, Third Pole is manufacturing two kinds of devices. One is a hospital device, which is built to interact with a ventilator. So patients are intubated and ventilated in various therapeutic situations, be it the medical ICU, the surgical ICU, during cardiothoracic surgery, or in the NICU, in the neonatal intensive care unit. And this device will generate, spark inside. There's a sparking chamber inside this device, produces the nitric oxide, which is then delivered into the ventilator circuit. It can also deliver into a mask or into a nasal cannula. But this little chap here, the EnoFit device, is a mobile embodiment of the same technology, where you just have a battery and you have an ambient air filter. So you take in ambient air, spark in the same way, produce nitric oxide, which is then delivered into a nasal cannula, nasal prongs, for chronic treatment at home. So patients will walk around with this device at home or sleep with this device and get their nitric oxide therapy 24 hours a day for months, weeks, months and years. That's the plan. So as part of my role as Chief Medical Officer, I was asked to drive a grant application team or process, and we have been successful as a team in obtaining so far 4 grants from the NIH. We had, so in the world of grants, if you're just starting off, you usually go after a phase 1 grant, because then you're starting off, your technology is really in its infancy, and you want some initial support money. Those grants, phase 1 grants, are usually $300,000 to $500,000 perhaps, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's not, as you know, when you're trying to develop new technologies. But we are fortunate because we'd already had funding from private investment that allowed us to do the phase 1 work first. And so we went through a pathway which is called Direct to Phase 2. And we went to the NHLBI, and we also went to the NCATS agency, the National Center for Advanced Technology. And we were lucky in that we first of all got 2 Direct to Phase 2 grants, one in 2016 and this one also in 2016. Now the NIH looks at these 2 as follow-on grants as being one long grant. So the direct to phase 2 NHLBI grant was to support the hospital device, and the phase 2B, which we got in 2019, is a follow-on really for the same device. And the direct to phase 2 NCAT grant was for the mobile, the ambulatory device, which I showed you on the right. And we then got, just this year, we got awarded a phase 2B to continue the work towards commercialization. And the total funding from these 4 grants is multi-million dollars. And it really has made a huge impact on a small company like Third Pole. So it sounds, so we had success, but the question is, how is that success? How do you achieve that success? And it's certainly a lot of work, and I'll try and take you through some of the steps that led to this picture. By the way, we had several applications in this period where we weren't successful, and for one reason or another, based off the feedback we got, we decided not to reapply, because if you get turned down the first time, you can turn it around and you can reapply for the same grant. In a couple of instances, we decided that it wasn't going to be successful based off the feedback. What kind of aims? So in these grants, you have specific aims which are put together by you and your team, and they should be activities that are really core to your development process. So for our hospital device, we got money to support formative human factors studies, which are, as you know, you do formative work at the beginning and then you do summative in the end. But this was for formative work, and we basically interviewed lots of RTs, respiratory therapists, physicians, and nurses who use the hospital device and are familiar with inhaled nitric oxide. And we, that was the core activity that we needed to do at that time for our hospital device. We also put money into developing the prototype or advancing the prototype to a more, a later stage. And the second grant, the phase 2B, is we got money to validate the hospital device with mechanical ventilators. Now, as you know, there are so many ventilators out there, and you have to make sure that your device is going to be compatible with each and every one of those ventilators. And that's quite a lot of work for each one. You have to understand the way those ventilators function and how your device can interface with those devices. And it's like part of your labeling that you're validated for use with a list of ventilators, which hopefully you expand over time. We also got money to validate the hospital device for patient transportation. So patients who are very sick, who need nitric oxide, sometimes have to be transferred between medical institutions. And to do that, you use ambulances in general, but also you might use a fixed-wing aircraft or even helicopters eventually. But we got money to do validation of the device for ambulances and fixed-wing aircraft. Interestingly, we also got money to support 2 small clinical trials for the hospital device. Now, it's quite unusual, I think, to get companies, who apply for money for small clinical trials. And the NHLBI in this instance was very excited about the fact that they would get to award money for a clinical trial. We haven't yet commenced those trials, but the process is an interesting one with the NIH. It's a lot of paperwork when a grant has clinical trials in it. It's an extra workload to fill in all the paper, the documents that you need to do for a clinical trials. And when we actually execute on the trials, we're going to have to fill in a bunch more paperwork. So it's very bureaucratic. Pivoting to the mobile device, we got the initial grant to do similar to the hospital device, formative human factors. In this instance, we interviewed patients to see how they would react to different weights of device, different designs of device, what they might like to see on the user interface. So formative work that was really important in coming up with our design. We also did work on developing the prototype or advancing it further down the road. And the second grant, the phase 2B, built on the phase 2 grant to miniaturize the technology, because we can't produce a device that's very heavy. Patients won't wear it, they can't use it. So we have to have a miniaturized version of the device, which eventually is going to be about 2 to 3 pounds. And we also got money to develop a cloud-based monitoring system. So our patients are sent home with a device, they're very sick patients. We'd like to have a cloud-based monitoring system for oxygenation, heart rate, respiratory rate, and activity levels. And this can be used both for safety, but also to develop novel endpoints for our clinical programs. So I'm trying to be very high level here because it is a complex process, but for those of you who've never done it, I think it's important to search, and I should expand this, search beyond the NIH, as we've just heard from the previous speaker. There's many different agencies that do award money for medical programs. We happen just to focus on the NIH, although at times we've considered other agencies, and I think you should always consider a multi-agency approach. But the NIH has been a good home for us so far. You look for RFAs or requests for applications that are relevant to your projects. Usually associated with the RFAs are areas of interest, and you should read that carefully, because the last thing you want to do is apply for a grant and you're really not focusing on the areas that the NIH is interested. And within the NIH, you have to decide which agency fits you best. And that's just a process of reading through these very long RFA documents, but more importantly, to speak to the program officers that whose names are provided on these RFAs, and to call them to interact with them, so that you can gauge whether this grant number is relevant to your project, or could they recommend another one that's more relevant. Which phase grant? It's pretty simple. As I said before, if you don't have much data, you're probably in the phase 1 territory. If you have a lot of proof of principle data, then you could try for a direct to phase 2, which is a step up and also advances you much further down the road. And then the phase 2B should be a grant that takes you from, I would say, mid-stage development towards commercialization. And so a phase 2B should be really focused on the end game. And I think once you think where you're at in your projects, you can pretty much decide what phase is relevant to your company. Now, as I said before, it wasn't my success, it was our team's success. We work in a team environment, and I don't think it's possible for one person to do this easily on their own. The content creation is the most important part, in my opinion. So it starts with the scientists, the physicians, to come up with the specific aims in the first instance, and to think carefully how to execute on those aims. We also need people from the finance side of the company, because there are several documents, including the commercialization plan. I'll talk about that briefly on an upcoming slide. The budget, which is, I don't understand at all. It's like a foreign language to me. But you need someone who's good at Excel spreadsheets, who can cross-link the aims to the budgets, and to make sure that it's internally consistent. And you also have to write a budget justification, which is going through pretty much every line item in the budget and justifying why it's necessary. I think project managers play an important role, because they keep the whole process of putting the application together, and also after the award is made, to manage the actual grant itself, which is no mean task in terms of finances, making sure you're progressing, preparing reports which are requested by the NIH quite frequently, And also there are consultants who can help you, particularly on the scientific side, to put together the cogent arguments that you need to make. External input is important as well, and don't wait too late for this. Interact with your program officer, get to know them, get to know what they like. Show the program officer your specific aims. Question them about what's hot and cool in their opinion, what's not so cool, what are they interested in, what's their agency interested in, and then get specific feedback on a written version of your specific aims so that they can tell you, well, I don't think this is going to be very attractive, but that thing should be expanded. Now, as part of our effort, we also enlisted an agency that helped us, tremendously in the process. Anyone who's interested, I could provide their name after this meeting. I don't want to, include a commercial for them at the moment, but this agency was really so important because the people in the agency had about 35 years experience with the NIH, and they could read through our application, and pull it to bits at times, suggest rephrasing something when they didn't understand something. They say, well, if I don't understand it, then the reviewers are not going to understand it. So it helps us really hone down what we're putting together. And they also know a lot about the rules, what can you do, what can't you do? And that really comes into great use. It was very efficient to work with one of these agencies. Now we only work with one, so I can only speak about one, and they may be all different one from the other, but I think for the money it cost us, it was well worth the effort.
Philip, time check, you have 5 minutes.
Sure, I'm almost there. Application components, there are major components. The specific aims, we touched on that. That's a one-page document, summarizes the main objectives. This is relevant to NIH SBIR grants. The research strategy really is the specific aims and how you're going to execute on them in more detail. So this is put together by physicians, scientists, engineers. The commercialization plan really is put together by everybody, but the finance managers, the marketing professionals are good at doing this part of the application. It's about a 12-page document. The research strategy is a 12-page document. The budget justification, again, finance managers in collaboration with the entire team have to put that together. And then there's multiple other activities that need to go into the application: registrations, documents like bio sketches, letters of support from external bodies, vendors, and consultants. I also think it's useful to have one person to get familiar with the application portal, ERA Commons in the case of the NIH, which is not simple to navigate, but the help desk is very easy to access and very efficient. Now, you can call them as many times as you want, and I found that to be very quick. Sometimes you didn't know what to do, just call them and they'll tell you. And also, we did make a project plan that leads up to filing the application, which should occur several days in advance of the deadline in case there's some glitch in the system. So we really put together a project plan, and we try to keep everybody marching in lockstep with that plan. I know I've got 2 minutes. So the research strategy, I said, is a core document. It has the background, what's the unmet medical need? What are you proposing to address that? Where are you in development? What's the competitive landscape? And how do you differentiate from competitors? Those are some of the big areas to cover. The specific aims lays out exactly what you want to do. And then details of how and who will execute each specific aim, including vendors, external agencies, and things like that. And then describe what success looks like. The summary of the regulatory pathway you're following and any interactions with FDA is also very useful. Remember the audience, they're reviewers, and they're of varying backgrounds and levels of understanding. They may and probably know little of the subject matter that you spend all your time on. So to some extent, you need to dumb it down, include helpful schematics to make it clear and simple, correct your grammar and spelling, and that is something that's really important. You need to put a Madison Avenue touch on the story. So by using banners, for instance, we put one banner in the middle of one grant that said, you know, our therapy will prolong the lives of babies and things like that. It seems a little catchy, but I think it's effective to bring out the message very strongly, as if you're making an elevator pitch. Commercialization plan is the market opportunity, the competition, your IP portfolio, who your team is, who your board members are, who your external partners are, your facilities, equipment, how this awards is essential to get to market. What's your source of funding for the company? You have to give some detail around how you've raised your money, and also how are you cost sharing for each specific aim. So the NIH likes cost sharing, they may even require it. So don't come and ask for all the money. You have to show that you're participating in the pain of paying for all of this. Post-application, keep your eye on the ERA Commons website, keep in touch with the program officer, look at the roster of reviewers. You'll then get your score, you'll then receive a summary statement, which really is the reviewer's comments on your application. You'll see whether your score is fundable. If it's fundable, you aren't guaranteed to get funded, but you should submit responses to the reviewers, and that can help you get it funded. And they may require just-in-time information, so get working on those and get them in as quickly as possible. And so that's it. It's just my high-level take on the whole process. There's a lot of money out there. If you're very thoughtful about things, you can get funded. And if you don't get funded the first time, you make it better and you go back again. So with that, I'll pause.
Thank you, Philip. That was very detailed information and very informative.